Hi, I'm Kathy Lynch from Easthampton Media, and welcome to our public forum on question 2. Today's forum is sponsored by the Easthampton Education Association, and I'll introduce the panelists. All the way from the far, Chris Capucci from Save Our Public Schools, Nellie Donahue from the Easthampton Education Association, Mayor Karen Cadger, Superintendent Nancy Follansby, and School Committee Member Casey Corsello. And Nellie had a statement she would like to read to open up the forum. Nellie.
Welcome, everyone. I want to thank the participants in the panel discussion and the forum tonight for coming out to discuss the important issue that's facing our electorate next week. So I'm Nellie Donahue. I've been teaching at Easthampton High School since 2008. I'm a member of the Easthampton Education Association Executive Board. And I work with Mass Teachers Association to promote awareness of state and national issues in our local community. So Easthampton Media and EEA have invited Mayor Cadger, Superintendent Follansby, Casey, and from Casey Corsello from the school committee, and Chris Capucci from Save Our Public Schools to speak to you tonight about some specific questions that relate to the question 2 issue. And how they relate specifically to the people of Easthampton, because we want you to be educated voters. The question proposes to raise the cap on charter schools in Massachusetts by up to 12 schools every year without end. This event is not intended in any way to be a debate. The purpose of this is really information for voters. At the conclusion of the program, we'll maybe speak to some clarifying issues, but at this time, I just want to thank the panel for coming out and for their active participation in our democracy. So I'm going to turn the floor back over to Kathy, and she's going to lead us through some questions, and we will discuss.
Okay, thanks, Nellie. So we're just going to move right into our first question, and I think that perhaps Mayor and Nancy could take the lead on this one, and then we'll throw it out to the panel, which is question number 1 is, please explain exactly how charter schools bring more funding to public education.
Well, I would love to explain that, Kathy, if it were true. So I absolutely have no idea whatsoever, however, that charter schools bring more funding to public education, to not our public education. So I just jotted down just a few figures, and I know this is no secret. We've talked many times, Chris and Nancy. This is a very, very frustrating ballot question. The reason it's frustrating is because I think that this question is about, all about, raising the amounts, like, more charter. What it should be about is funding and accountability. It is not. So we're stuck with the question we have. So it's our hope that if the residents understand the question and understand the consequences to just our city, that they will vote accordingly, and that would be no on question 2. So this is the interesting part. So how they bring more money. This is what I'd like to do. I'd like to talk about how it brings less money, a whole lot less, in my opinion. So this year alone, the way it works is we receive an assessment for charter, which is a charge. It comes right off our cherry sheet, so off our funding every year. So an assessment is a charge, and a reimbursement, as we all know, is a reimbursement. So this year, our assessment, what we have to pay out for charter schools, is $1,113,723,000. Okay, what we receiving in, this is the part that I think is really interesting. What we're receiving in is $170,839. So that is a net loss, deficit, hole, whatever you want to call it, of over $943,000 to our education system. So I'd like somebody to explain to me how this is not a loss of public educational funds, because I don't get it. And I don't get it because it isn't. So, like, I know every year during budget period, Nancy and I go over the budget, and, you know, we really definitely spend a lot of time on it, sweating on it, you know, trying to make education, you know, our number one top priorities, along with other public services that we are in dire need of. And to lose over $943,000, I can't even imagine what we could do with that money. I just can't even imagine. But just going back a little bit, if you just go back, though, this is 2017, just go back to 2014, it was 499. So look at the difference in how that has grown from 14 to 17. And then tell me that we're not losing any money.
So are you saying that it's almost doubled?
Yes, absolutely. Well, 499 to a little over 943.
So it has doubled, essentially, in
Very close to it.
3 years.
Yes, from fiscal 2014 to fiscal 2017. So I think when people really know what they're voting for, this is what they really, really need to know. And this is crucial to our public education. You know, every year we go over, you know, what classes, hopefully we don't want to ever have to delete any of our services, but what we can do, we want to, you know, bring more. Now, if we had 943,000 extra dollars, first of all, Nancy and I would be smiling through the whole budget. So,
Well, I think that, you know, we would think about all the different programs and services that we could either put back that we've had to eliminate because of this drain of funding, or that we would like to have in our schools. So a number of our students go to Chinese immersion. One of the original premises of the charter movement was that the charter schools would present a model that we could replicate. Well, we simply can't replicate a Chinese immersion school. But not only that, with this drain of funding, this over $900,000 of funding drained from our district, we aren't even able to put in the world languages programs that we would like to be able to put in our district. And with that additional funding, we'd be able to do that. We'd be able to put a more robust world languages program in our middle school, and perhaps bring world languages to our elementary school. But we simply cannot do that with the funding that we currently have. And when I talk with my colleagues, my superintendent colleagues, we also wonder about this statement, about how it's bringing more funding to public schools. I also wonder about Governor Baker's advertisements, where he talks about if you like your school, question 2 won't affect you, because we're not seeing that here in Easthampton. And Chris and Nellie, I don't know if you have more information on where this statement's coming from and how they believe that this is adding more funding to our public schools.
Well, so I actually, before I get into that, I want to go back to the original topic of the cap on charters. The question actually eliminates 2 caps. So one is the number of charter schools that are allowed to operate in the Commonwealth. The current law says 120, and we're at 81, by the way, for the Commonwealth. So that's not really the issue. For me, one of the reasons why I got involved in this campaign is actually the second cap, which would be eliminated. That is, currently there's a cap on the total percentage of a district school budget that is allowed to be spent on charter schools. And this question would allow charters to operate regardless of that cap. It doesn't actually strike the language of the cap from the general laws. It just allows the charters to operate regardless of that cap. So currently for Easthampton, we're capped at 9% of our school budget is allowed to be spent on charters. If question 2 were to be successful, that cap would be eliminated. You could see 18%, 33%. There would be no limit to how much Easthampton could spend on its charters. And second, even though it says in the question that if more than 12 applications are filed in a year, that priority is given to districts that are in the bottom 25% of performance by whatever metric the state decides are a successful school district, usually standardized test scores. That doesn't mean it won't affect the other 75% of school districts, because charter schools don't operate under the boundaries of our district schools. So for example, Easthampton is very close to 4 gateway cities, actually, all of which seek to be given a charter school should this question go through. Those gateway cities could receive a charter school because they fall into the bottom 25% of performing school districts, and then they would be free to recruit students from Easthampton. They could place 3 charter schools, you know, in our neighbor city, Holyoke, or just down the road in Chicopee or Springfield, and they could recruit students from from Easthampton. And actually, because they receive their money based on a per pupil average in the sending district, there's a financial incentive for the charter schools to recruit students from the districts that spend more money per pupil. So there's this idea that it'll only affect the bottom 25%. Even if they placed all of them in a gateway city or in a poor or quote failing school district, they could recruit students from communities that spend more per pupil, regardless of wherever they're placed. So that's the other thing. So to the claim that it will bring in more money for public education, what I think that's based on is there is on the books a reimbursement formula for a sending district should a student choose to go to a charter school. For the first year, it's supposed to be 100% of the total cost of tuition. The statewide average, by the way, is $15,000 per student. I think in Easthampton it's actually more than $15,000 a student. Technically, it's 100%. But for the first year, and then for each subsequent year, it's 25% the cost of tuition. But the reimbursement fund has not been fully funded by the legislature in 5 or 6 years, I think. So as with everything that the legislature has for reimbursement funds, it's always, the law is written in its way, and then it says, comma, subject to appropriation. And if the legislature doesn't appropriate that money, then the districts are on the hook for coming up with the rest. So for example, in Holyoke, just over the border there, their charter liability is over $11 million, but even after reimbursements, they're still on the hook for over $9 million. So nowhere near what the reimbursement formula should be, even at the smallest reimbursement formula. So what I think they're trying to say is more charter schools means, oh, the districts are going to get these reimbursements, which means if Easthampton is sending 15 grand to a charter school and we give them 100% of the reimbursement for the first year, that's an extra 15 grand for public education. In reality, there's nothing in the ballot question that says the state is required to fully fund reimbursements. That would be
That goes.
yeah, that would be an issue for the budget at the legislative level.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add on something to that? Because I think there's a misunderstanding too about that reimbursement. So I think many people believe that we are reimbursed the cost of educating that child in our district. The money follows the child, but not the cost. And let me give you a simple example. If I lose one charter school student from each of grades K through 4, I'm losing 5 students. Let's say the tuition was $10,000. Then we're losing $50,000 from our district. But I'm not able to eliminate a teacher. I'm not able to reduce busing. I'm not able to reduce utility costs. So the costs are still there, and yet this money has left our district. So I think that that's a real strong misunderstanding that I'd like to clear up today. The other cost to us, if you have a charter school in your district, is transportation. So we are required to bus any students in Easthampton to a charter school that is in our district, and we happen to have one in our district. Students who are bused have to follow the same policy that we have for all of our students. However, they don't have to follow the same schedule. We have to accommodate the charter school schedule. So that means if we had a professional development day and we weren't busing our students, we would still have to bus the charter school students. This year, we were able to do the busing that was requested of us without an additional cost to transportation. But in all likelihood, if more families request transportation, then we are going to have to purchase more buses with the company we contract with. Each bus that we add on to our fleet of buses costs the district $70,000. So again, that's a hidden cost that charter schools drain from the funding that's available to us, for us to educate our students.
Thank you, Nancy, for bringing that up. That was, I think, a really important message. The other thing, another hidden cost is we have a charter school here in Easthampton that actually bought the property. That $3.2 million, that real estate tax comes off our books. So that is what the city does, is collect real estate taxes, and that's how we, fund a major part of our budget. So when you have not only a school close by, which we have seen as a school committee, and the increase by having a school right in your city or town, it has increased enrollment into the charter. So losing more students has definitely been a trend. And then, and as the school grows, well, first of all, coming off our tax base, that's huge. It's another hidden cost that people don't think about. They're real estate tax free, but also increasing their services. When it was in the Hilltown, was it grades 1 to 6, Nancy, or 1 to?
I don't remember,
Yeah,
but
now it's
they've raised 1 through 8th grade.
Yes, now
they did add
they've extended their
2 more
services.
grades, yeah.
So there's a lot of exactly what you're talking about, hidden costs.
And I just want to say too that I don't think that any of us are opposing the ideas of charter schools in themselves. It's the funding formula
Exactly.
that is not working in public education here in Massachusetts. And so to pass this ballot question, before we get a sustainable funding formula for all public schools, just does not make sense. It really pits us as schools against each other, one against another, and creates an atmosphere of the haves and have-nots. So let's get the funding formula fixed. Let's get a sustainable funding formula that doesn't penalize the community schools that, as all the advertisements say, educate 96% of the students here in Massachusetts. Let's find a system that doesn't penalize those of us who are educating all children, and finding that the funding that we need is being drained away from our districts.
And that's another important thing too, because what we have been working on the level, Nancy's level and my level, is we have been working with our legislatures on this funding issue for many years, not just this year, not just last year. This is, as you can see, this is an ongoing issue that's extremely costly. So, and I was told, the way to go is we'd have to, initiate a bill through the legislator for funding, and if this ballot question passes, forget about it, because it would show support for the exact opposite of what we're talking about. So what we really need to make sure that people understand that this funding mechanism is not going to change if people do not vote no on this question. And sadly enough, again, it should not have been proposed this way. It should have been a funding and accountability, and again, in no way is this a reflection on parents. Every parents have, the right choice to make for their own child. So I feel that there's a lot of frustration with this and animosity, and we want nobody to feel those repercussions.
And to your point, I think that it's important to distinguish the language of this question from a referendum about whether charter schools are good or bad for our education system. That's not what this question is about.
Exactly.
And if people are trying to convince you that's what this question is about, they're doing you a significant disservice. What's important is that families, the way that our laws are written right now, families have choices about where they want to educate their children. But what we are choosing on next Tuesday is whether to fundamentally destabilize the budgets of public school systems across the state. And so that's the choice we're making, and we want you to vote no on destabilizing those budgets. We want you to vote no in support of district public schools.
Okay, we need to move on to the next question. The next question is, Charter proponents say that charter schools are public schools, but charter opponents claim that charter proponents say that charter schools are public schools. Charter opponents claim that charter schools are private schools with public funding. I think maybe Chris and Nellie, this would be good for you. Could you explain that discrepancy?
Sure. So the way it works most of the time is the charter school itself is a registered nonprofit organization. What happens is the board or the administration hires these education management organizations to run the day-to-day operations of the school. So whereas the public schools have an elected school committee and a superintendent with a principal who manages the budget, the day-to-day operations of the school, those services are contracted, those services in a charter school are contracted to a private organization. Very rarely is that private organization based in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. There are a few examples where some of them are, but the vast majority of them are not based in the Commonwealth. And also the boards of these charter schools very rarely have a parent or a teacher on their board. They tend to be out-of-state, hedge fund managers whose entire job is to make a profit. And part of the problem with that, as anyone who works in public education will tell you, is you can't go into public education thinking that profit margin is the most important part, especially when you consider that the most expensive students to educate are the most high need students, the English language learners, special needs. My sister was had severe dyslexia, and she, to have the IEP and the special needs coordinators that were able to get her up to her peers at the reading level costs more money than it does to teach a student like me who was fortunate enough to not have any special needs. These services are completely written into, in a charter school, are completely written into their bottom line, and so that's why these students don't fit into the charter model, because they don't make a profit for the charter school.
In addition, charter schools are legally classified in Massachusetts as public schools, but as Chris was saying, charter schools are operated by boards of directors. The teachers at charter schools are not required to be fully licensed teachers in the state of Massachusetts, which is the same as in private school. I taught in private school for 5 years before I got my master's and became a public school teacher. And so in that process of becoming a Massachusetts public school teacher, I had to fulfill not only the state testing licensure requirements, but also time spent in a classroom with a certified licensed teacher, learning to educate students with a range of needs, some of whom had very significant needs. And that was part of my educational experience as becoming a teacher in a Commonwealth of Massachusetts public school. And so teachers in charter schools are not required to go through that rigorous educational experience to prepare them to educate all of students.
And the reality is I have a bachelor's degree in political science, and I'm working in politics. And I could go to a charter school tomorrow and be considered for a history teacher job. I am in no way, shape, or form qualified to be a teacher, but I would be a candidate. A public school would look at me and say, no, you don't have the qualifications. Sorry. And that's, I think, something that people should be mindful of if they want more, charter schools in the area, is they are not required to hire licensed teachers. The MTEL is the state teacher certification exam, and it is really hard.
It is extremely difficult.
I mean, and not that history is necessarily everyone's favorite subject, but the history MTEL, my friend who is a teacher, he took this test, and I was looking at these questions, and I don't know if I could pass that. I mean, it was, this was a very intense exam. So,
I also just want to add to it that, you know, the public schools have a school committee that is elected by their district that are making decisions, you know, based on the budget and policy. And it is for everyone to see. Everyone can come in and see what's happening here. It's open to the public. We don't know what decisions are making. And this is your taxpayer money that is going to the charter school. And we don't know how it's being spent or not being spent. Whereas, you know, it's very transparent with what's going on in your public school.
yeah, I mean, the other issue with it, the public versus private argument is you're sitting here with a mayor and a superintendent. If they wanted to see how the money is being spent at a charter school, they wouldn't have access to that, even though it's Easthampton taxpayer dollars that are being spent at a charter school. They have access to the information at the public schools. They have access to whatever they need. But in a charter school, even with our money, they don't, the charter school can close the door on them.
And same goes for every community member in Easthampton. They have access to how we spend our money, both at the city level and at the school level. We have to have complete transparency in our budget process. We put our budgets on the website so that all community members can see them. There's an approval process where the community is invited to see the budget process. So very different from the way our charters are set up.
You even see on our school committee meetings where we vote every week on just our accounts payable.
Yeah.
You know, our payroll and our accounts payable, so whatever invoices are processed at the, you know, for the school committee to vote on. And they're all right there, the amounts, and the votes are
And
taken in
even
public.
gifts, even when we receive gifts, you can see how much money is coming in from, you know, just donations and things like that. We don't know how much money's coming in there.
I wanted to speak too, just for a minute, because we were talking about how the charter schools are less likely to have a population of students with special needs or second language students. When the committee, the Joint Committee on Education, was going around the state last year asking for information about our schools and the funding of schools, we did a position paper for them. And so I looked at quite a bit of data in our own district, one of them being the difference in charter schools and our own public schools in terms of the number of special education students. And this was in from 2000, I want to get it right, let's see, 2012 to 2015. There were 93 students who went out to charter schools. And of those 93 students, only 7 had an IEP. And that's from 2012 to 2015. So that was our own community's evidence of how few students with special needs are going to our charter schools compared to how many students we have in our public schools here.
And actually, Nancy, that was the next question,
Right.
was to, and I'm just going to put this out to the larger panel, so whoever feels like they can answer, feel free to jump in, which is, can you compare or contrast the special education services differences in charter versus district schools? And if possible, to be specific in financial terms and also human terms.
I think one of the important points to bring up is that even when students do qualify for special education services at a charter school, by law, the charter school is required to provide for those students' needs. But what's important to recognize is that special education teachers or people hired to provide special education services to students in charter schools are not required to be special education teachers who are certified by the state. They merely have to be overseen by someone who has the special education licensure from the state. And so what is, I think, frequently occurring in charter schools in order to save costs on their part is not hiring actual qualified special ed teachers to provide services to students. And I think that that's a significant disservice to students who choose and families who choose to spend or choose to place their children in charter schools. So I think there's a significant difference in services. A report came out just last week about special education services within charter schools. It's available on the Save Our Public Schools website. The report is called Massachusetts Charter Schools Special Education Performance by the Numbers, and it's written by a former charter school parent whose name is Michael Robinson, who also worked for the Executive Office of Education in Boston. And so he went through the numbers and pulled out a whole lot of data about how charter schools are serving schools, are serving special ed students specifically. And really, one of the major points that he found is that 67% of the districts with the lowest service to students, to special ed students, are charter districts. Charters are often classified as a district, just the same as Easthampton Public Schools is a district. A charter school is its own district, oftentimes. And so 67% of the lowest service providing districts to special ed students actually are charter schools. And so, you know, in Easthampton, every student who walks through the door who needs special education services is addressed to the best of our possible capabilities. And unfortunately, in the budget cuts that have happened in the past couple of years, or the money flowing out from charter schools in the past couple of years, what we're seeing is it's a lot harder for Superintendent Follansbee to keep some of the most important positions that happen in our public schools, which are the paraprofessionals who support students every day in classrooms so that they can experience the regular education curriculum. And so, you know, with what could we do with $900,000? We could hire paraprofessionals that would influence students' abilities to access the curriculum that we're offering them. And we offer in Easthampton an incredibly rich curriculum to our public school students. And so, you know, having more bodies in classrooms to serve students is a major way that we would be able to serve students better. And so, you know, I think it's important to realize that in addition to just the service to special ed students, the report that I just mentioned found that students in charter schools special ed students in charter schools are 3 times more likely to be disciplined than regular education students. And, or special education students are 3 times more likely to be disciplined at a charter school than at a district public school. And that's significant because there are laws in Massachusetts that that, you know, manage the disciplining of special ed students because it can be problematic if it's not paid close attention to. And so it's something that district public schools take great care to ensure that we're serving students well in terms of special ed needs and in terms of discipline, and incorporating the students in the community of the school as best we possibly can.
Great. Anybody else like to add to that question? Okay, then let's move on to our last question, which is, and I think that perhaps, Chris, this might be your forte. As of October 10th, 2016, Ballotpedia lists the Question 2 campaign is spending at $12 million for expanding a cap and $6 million against ballot Question 2. How do you explain this disparity of funding, and what are the policy implications on the future of public education?
So actually, those numbers are now outdated. So let me just put this into perspective. The proponents of Question 2 have actually set 3 records for the amount of what is called dark money. That's untraceable. We have no idea who the donors are of money. Now, I should preface that by saying we do have disclosure in Massachusetts. We do have, according to the Office of Campaign and Political Finance, we are able to see which groups are spending money on our elections. The difference is, I really like our state representative in Easthampton. His name is John Sybeck. If I could give him a total of $1,000 in a calendar year. That's the limit to how much I'm allowed to donate to a legislative candidate. But there is no campaign contribution limit for a ballot question. So that's why you have individuals who are donating $100,000 or so of their own money into this race. So the opposition, Great Schools Massachusetts, has actually had 3 records set for the amount of dark money that was given to a question, and I just want to go over a few of them here. One, it's the most money that has ever been spent on a Massachusetts ballot initiative. ever. The opposition has already spent, so as of October 10th, it was 12 million. They've actually already spent 17.5 million, so $5.5 million in, what is that, 3 weeks? And it's going to, by the way, probably grow to about $21 million is what I saw the estimates showing. That's more than that's ever been spent on, that 17.5 million is more than has ever been spent on any ballot question from both the for and against side combined in Massachusetts history. And just so you, and if you're curious, the previous record was 2014, was question 3, which would have limited the growth of casino gambling in Massachusetts, where $15.3 million was spent by both sides. That was the previous record for most expensive ballot question in Massachusetts history. We're now at 17.5 million for the yes side alone. 2, the other record they sent is it's the most money for a charter ballot, for a pro-charter ballot question in the United States history. The previous record rather was Washington State 2012, where proponents spent $11.4 million to get a pro-charter expansion question passed there. And to put that into perspective with this one, we could see that doubled with the yes on 2 side here in Massachusetts. And the last record that was set, it's the highest amount of dark money spent on any race in Massachusetts, state or federal race at all, including legislative races. The previous record, and this is what I think is really something that I wish people would be talking about more often, the previous record was the Scott Brown versus Elizabeth Warren race, where $8 million of dark money was spent to influence that election. So like I said, we have disclosure. We have the ability to see the names of the organizations that are donating it. You've got a super PAC, Families for Excellence Schools, which tries to do these things all over the country. You have Democrats for Education Reform, again, another dark money super PAC that has a few state-based affiliates, but they can donate, as much money as they want, and we have no idea who their donors are. And then we've also seen the Walton family, the founders of Walmart, have donated millions of their own money into this race. From our side, it has mostly come from the Massachusetts Teachers Association and the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers are who have been the largest contributors. But the other side is outspending us 2-1. I mean, I want to make that very clear that, they can say all they want. Well, the special interests are trying to scare you to vote against question 2. The special interests are teachers. That's
Right. The educators.
the educators.
The ones that spend every day with your children.
Yeah, the ones who don't have bottomless amounts of money, bottomless pockets to spend unlimited amounts of money on a legislative race.
I would also argue that the special interests are the families of the children who are not sending their children to charter schools.
Right, the 96% of Massachusetts students who go to public schools, not charters.
So Chris, I'm just wondering if you can kind of connect some of the dots. So what are the policy implications of that kind of a political campaign? And how much money you dump into a campaign define the outcome?
So we actually already saw this bleed over into a number of legislative races in the state. There are two, I think, really pertinent examples. One was in Cambridge, you had a state Senate race where the incumbent Senator Pat Jalen had a primary opponent who was endorsed by the Democrats for Education Reform. And like I said, I could really like, Pat Jalen. I can only spend $1,000 to support her. But the Democrats for Education Reform is allowed to because of Citizens United and all this lovely, this interpretation that I disagree with, that money is speech, they paid for a mailer to support her opponent. And she was ultimately successful, but I think you're going to see more examples of this where they try to go after individual legislate. A state legislative race doesn't, any legislative candidate doesn't have millions of dollars at their disposal to run for re-election. And to go after state policymakers with unlimited amounts of dark money is, I think, going to frighten some state legislators from taking a stand on this issue. The other race was actually a little bit more local. Out in Pittsfield, you had a state's rep, Tricia Farley Bouvier, whose opponent had a Democrats for Education Reform, DFER, mailing sent to the district, week of the primary, saying, and they, of course, they don't say on their mailers that we endorse this person because they're going to make more charter schools. They say we're Democrats for Education Reform and we support him because he's going to be great for public education. They don't ever admit that they're trying to grow charter schools. The other thing, and I think this is a little bit less known, so other than now spending unlimited amounts of money supporting the opponents of legislators who stand on the side of public education. And we do have, by the way, 120 legislators in the Commonwealth that have endorsed No on 2. So have all taken a political risk for their future. We have 200 legislators total, by the way. 121 have endorsed No on 2. All are taking a risk in doing so. But the other thing I think you're going to see is, I think if question 2 is defeated, the opposition is going to look at where it won. And they seem to think they're going to win in the gateway cities. I'm the Western Mass field organizer. I have 5 gateway cities in my turf. I don't think they're going to win in them, but let's just say that was true. Let's just say they won in the gateway cities. I think that going forward, they're going to go back to the legislature, and especially to the legislators who represent gateway cities, and a number of them have endorsed No on 2. In fact, in Western Mass, not a single legislator from a gateway city has endorsed Yes on 2. Mm-hmm. We have all 5 there, the Springfield, Holyoke, Chicopee, Westfield, and Pittsfield. All of their legislative delegations have endorsed No on 2. I think if question 2 were to win in their districts but lose the overall statewide race, you're going to see the opposition go after them in the legislature and say, this won in your district. We have the money. We will run candidates against you if you don't support something to do this for the people in your district. So that's why I think it's important that we defeat this by a hefty margin.
Okay, thank you. Panel, that was our last question. I would like to thank you all for coming out today, and I think you've done the voters of Easthampton a great service by providing more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
And thank you, Easthampton Media.
And thank you, folks at home watching. Happy voting on November 8th, and good night.